You can hardly find a girl in bikini wearing this type of cap, but mostly in 2000s. You remember that? They were wearing it with different glam outfits.
Brooklyn exteriors. Brooklyn exteriors.
Unless you put a ribbon on that.
Huh?
Of course no. It looks like you did something wrong. Hello guys, so very important information today about hats. There are loads of hats that are very specific. They can be religious, traditional, military hats, and some of those hats actually got to our wardrobe. So those are the hats that we're gonna talk about today. And most people can incorporate that in their wardrobe. We're gonna look at the origin of the hat, where it started from, what aesthetic it is reminding us of, and then how it's being worn today. So some time ago, the difference between women's hats and men's hats was huge. Nowadays, we can meet all those kinds of men's hats in women's wardrobe. And this is one of the reasons why many women feel like when they're wearing a hat, they have more masculine look. Okay, let's start. First hat. Of course, if I say hat, what do you imagine? You imagine something like this. Fedora hat is the most classic, the most common hat nowadays. It normally is made with felt, with wool. It has straight and pretty wide brim. This is called brim. This is called crown. It has normally two dents here and a crease in the middle. Fedora first appeared in 1882 as a female hat. That year, the play called Fedora was produced, and the famous actress Sarah Bernard wore the center-creased, soft-brimmed hat. The hat was soon a pretty popular fashion piece for women, and this hat was worn by many women's rights activists. In 1924, Prince Edward of Britain started wearing the fedora, and this hat style was adopted by men. Then it was worn by gangsters like Al Capone, then Frank Sinatra, then Cary Grant in Hollywood. So the vibe that we get from fedora, from that old Hollywood situation, is gangsters and detectives. Mostly it's men, New York, noir films. Because 30s, 40s, and 50s, women were wearing different kinds of hats. They were very feminine with a lot of embroidery and additions. Of course, Marlene Dietrich and some other women, they were experimenting with men's hats, but mostly that was men's wardrobe. And nowadays is one of the most popular hats, both for men and women. There's that floppy style, and I actually have fedora with floppy style. That means that the brims slightly looking down, they're slightly flopped, and it's wavy, so it gives an appearance that it's just hanging in there, and it's pretty soft, and it looks a little bit like a sun hat, but we're gonna talk about this later. So whenever you want to soften your look and make it more casual and boho, you can go for floppy style fedora. If we imagine fedora hat in suede, for example, or softer textures, or even just in brown color or softer beige colors, and maybe not as stiff, so a little bit floppy. Something like Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones movies. This is the vibe that we get of West. Wild West, Old West, more simple hat, more boho, more cowboy hat. So that is a different vibe. That hat is worn with linen shirts, with more relaxed silhouettes, with that old Western style. Johnny Depp loves this style. Of course, when they make fedoras for boho style, there can be a lot of additions here. Beads, some stones, or they can be scarves. I have tons of small, thin scarves. I just ordered them from India, so I can change it for my hats all the time, and every time I have a different hat. The fedoras can even be very glamorous if they are made with stones. In women's wardrobe, normally fedoras look amazing in all season wardrobe, believe it or not, even in summer if it's not super hot. If it's super hot, then you choose straw hats, but we go to them later. Now, eclectic style, minimalist can look amazing. It could be strange with some very soft romantic style with ruffles and stuff, but you can always soften your hat again with a ribbon, flower, or something else, or just choose something with more wavy brim, softer brim. I don't think it will go good with aesthetic of sports or hip-hop unless you on purpose go for that. Now I'm gonna give you several types of fedora hat, or just some similar hats. So Homburg hat, it was called after the place in Germany. This is close to fedora, except for brims are not straight, but they're rolled up all over around. And similar aesthetic, similar styles as I just said about fedora, they're good for Homburg hat. Now, cowboy hat, it's another type of fedora hat. They're very similar to fedora, except for the brims are rolled up on the sides normally. Sometimes they even combine sun hat with cowboy, so sun hat is normally made with straw, so they have this woven kind of straw cowboy hats. Cowboy hat looks very farm, very down to earth, very natural, less official and less business casual. It looks more like a Wild West. Something linen, vests look good with that. Cowboy boots, of course, so if you want to go for that particular stylization. It can also look great with jeans, with scarf, and when it's worn with a dress, of course we're talking about simple dress, maybe floral dress, more like a casual dress, rather than very glamorous and bodycon. So when it's worn with this dress, it looks like a woman is wearing a hat of her man, which looks very romantic and very sweet in my viewpoint. Many country musicians, country rock musicians, they use this hat also in their outfits. Now let's go to trilby. And trilby hat, it goes from Tyrolean hat, it's a Robin Hood hat. It was kind of that very tiny fedora with tiny brims, and the brims were normally rolled up or on one side or all over. And trilby hat kind of comes from that. It's slightly larger though. We imagine Frank Sinatra. We imagine jazz musicians. It looks very small and compact and pretty sharp. It is looking a little bit more glamorous, especially for men. It looks great with small, compact and sharp clothes as opposed to something oversized and very soft and bulky and chunky. We're gonna talk about facial shapes and features in my next video, so stay tuned because we definitely gonna mention the difference between fedora hat and trilby hat. Now we have pork pie hat, and it's loved by musicians, by artists very much, especially that had like a new wave in 2010s when many hipsters started wearing that type of a hat. Nowadays I don't see as many people style this hat, but it's still being used. So why it's called pork pie? Because that really reminded people of real pork pies. Basically it has smaller brim and quite small and short crown, and it's flat. It looks very tomboy and again very jazzy, so that looks cool with suspenders, small crisp shirt, but at the same time it looks great as a daytime hat. Now we have boater hat. It goes from the word boat because people who worked on the boats, they had this kind of a hat. It was made with straw. It had wide brim as fedora, but on top it was just flat. It didn't have any crease or dents in there. Nowadays they make this boater hats also with wool. It's kind of like in between fedora and boater hat. So it definitely looks warmer. It doesn't look as summery. Maybe slightly pork pie hat too. It depends actually on the height of a crown and how wide the brims are. So this has a middle crown and middle kind of a brim. Some of the designs can have smaller ones, but normally boater hat has bigger brim. And real boater hats, they normally have some kind of a ribbon here. Of course, Venice gondoliers in their narrow boat. So this is basically what kind of style we imagine when we talk about boater hat. If you go for stripy t-shirt or shirt, red, white, blue, white, or black, white, you can go for small scarf here. And that kind of a boater hat, you can never go wrong with your style. So that will remind people of that summer Italian style. And if it's made with straw, then you actually can incorporate it in your style with different kinds of summer dresses. That will look very amazing and cute, especially if you have a ribbon and then you can make a bow on the back, and it will look very, very beautiful and cute and very feminine. And of course the woolen one just looks warmer. Now we have another similar type of a hat. It's called Cordovan hat. It came to us from Spain. It's pretty close to boater hat, but it has bigger straight brim, taller crown. Next type of a fedora hat is Boss of the Plains. Yes, it's pretty rare, but I found this hat on Amazon, believe it or not. It actually says Boss of the Plains hat. That hat was just actually pre-Cowboy. The crown is rounded and elongated. It's kind of like a square rounded, and you can style it similarly to the previous one, to Cordovan hat. Now let's go to bowler hat, and it was called by the name of the designer, bowler. Basically it's just that small hat made with felt that has round crown and small brim that is rolled up all around. Who does this hat remind you of? Charlie Chaplin, of course. That hat became very popular when Charlie Chaplin started wearing it. Silent movies in old Hollywood. At first it was just like that dress code to a female wardrobe. It actually came just in the 60s. Later we can see this hat in a famous movie 9.5 Weeks where Kim Basinger with Mickey Rourke, they were having that scene with balloons when they were walking, and she was wearing that 80s huge raincoat with huge shoulders, and she was wearing that bowler hat. Nowadays this is how they style this type of a hat. This hat is loved by girls who like tomboy style, artists, painters, poets. It's very artist kind of a hat. Now we have Panama hat and sun hat. Panama hat looks something in between fedora and trilby hat, but just made with straw. So the laws basically are the same. It's pretty structured and it's pretty sharp looking, and it's just a summer hat that looks great on men and women. It looks great with basically any summer style. Sun hat, however, it's more a female version of a hat. It has rounded crown and huge brim, and normally that brim can be whether very straight and stiff, or it can be slightly flopped, slightly going down, and slightly wavy. When it's wavy, it looks like trapeze going down slightly. It looks softer, more feminine slightly, and when it's just straight, it looks a little bit more stiff. Now we have two hats that are slightly different. It's Cloche hat. In French, it's a bell-shaped hat. So many shops nowadays sell this type of a hat. However, it can look slightly too dowdy if you're buying this hat with different additions, with some flowers or beads or even stones sometimes. So from my viewpoint, it's very, very old-fashioned looking. So if you really want to try this kind of a hat, just go for something very minimalistic. Nothing extravagant, no additions, just one color. Maybe maximum there would be some kind of a ribbon in there. Solid and classic color. Beige, black, dark blue, or gray. Don't wear it very low on your head. Keep it a little bit higher. This way you will avoid that kind of like a tiny head, big body situation. But again, we're going to talk about this in my next video about face shapes. There are great examples. We can see Victoria Beckham wearing this hat. Different street fashion women were wearing this kind of a hat. So that reminds us a lot about 1920s, 1930s. The peak was early 20s. This is actually another hat that is not worn by men, except for in this movie, Some Like It Hot. So in the beginning of the century, couture houses asked some hat making fashion houses to invent a hat that would fit clothes style that they started producing at that time. And the hats even shaped hairstyles. The Eton cut, for example, remember that short, sleek haircut. Also, we imagine Art Deco style, definitely. Narrow silhouettes, again, very New York style. I have very similar to Cloche style hat. It is made with straw, so it looks kind of like in between Cloche hat and sun hat. Kind of like this Panama hat. Nowadays, they mix many designs and many styles in one. This one also has floppy effect in it. I can basically style the brim the way I want, and I love it very much because I'm a huge fan lately of this wavy line of the brims. So I can't imagine this hat being worn with sports style or hip-hop style, for example. I can't see it also with boho style unless it's the straw one, the one that I just showed you. So I don't see it with something unconstructed. So if you're wearing this hat, make sure that everything else is quite shaped and quite narrow and a little bit on the sharper side. If it's made with felt or with wool, it looks good, of course, with different kinds of narrow coats, with or without belt. With belt, it will look much more feminine and give that slightly 1920s New York kind of a vibe. Now, as I call a brother of a Cloche hat is a bucket hat. This is a bucket hat. It looks like a bucket, of course. This one is made with wool and I bought it in H&M about 2 years ago. I adore this hat very much. It goes with everything, and it's probably one of the most popular hats nowadays because they make it with faux fur, with cotton, with wool, different kinds of fabric, with denim fabric, even with silk, and in different colors as well. You can add some ribbon to that and it will look different, and it will look slightly softer and more feminine. That hat looks very classic if it is worn just like this with a coat or a blazer or a suit. If it's made with straw, with some lighter material, it would look great in summer, even with the dresses, with different kinds of dresses actually. If you go for a dress, not with every dress, this type of a hat would look nice. It can look a little bit sporty even when it's done with cotton fabric or with denim. It was a fishing hat at the beginning. It was Irish farmers who was wearing this hat. It was actually very practical because it was protecting them from bad weather. It was waterproof because it was made with a certain kind of a wool that had natural oils in it, so the water would just not go through the hat. It was easy to clean. It was very foldable, so they would fold it and put to the pocket. They used cattle to put it back in shape, and also those little holes on the sides, that is for the purpose of ventilation, so their hat would not be sweating. Also, we can see similar hats in Vietnam War. They also called it that tropical hat. In the 60s, it got to female wardrobe. From my viewpoint, the 60s was kind of like the end of an extra feminine era. So in the 60s, a lot of unisex items appeared in female and male wardrobe. Because this is approximately the time when men started growing their hair, this is Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin band, 60s, 70s, he was wearing female blouses all the time and very narrow jeans and long hair. All that they got from female wardrobe, and women got a lot from male wardrobe. It got back in the 90s when many rappers started wearing this bucket hat, and also many hip-hop singers. In the band Oasis, English rock band Oasis in the 90s, they also were wearing this type of hat. A little bit of that English 90s rock vibe as well. So now if you buy it in different fabrics, it kind of guides you to which style you want to go. If it's denim and cotton, it's very casual outfit, very simple t-shirt, shirt, jeans, whatever you prefer, simple dresses. If you go for leather, it's a street style chic, it's a cool outfit. If you go for straw, it looks summer, light and romantic. If it's made with felt, it's classic autumn feel. Now we go to caps. Caps, it's a different thing. We have 5 main caps that we're gonna talk about today. They all are similar but slightly different still. It's a mariner's cap, flat cap, newsboy cap, patrol cap or military cap, army cap sometimes, and baseball cap. So those 5 caps you can find in the shops today. I just wanted to warn you because many shops, they don't use specific historical origin words for these types of hats. It's just simply people don't know the terms. So that would be easier for people to find those hats. They write so many different names like newsboy, captain, cab, taxi driver, cab, loads of different names. So just you would find it. And sometimes they write it even like beret with visor. Visor is this thing, partial brim above your eyes. These 5 caps though, they have slightly different shape configuration, so those nuances will help you to understand which one would look better for you, not only style-wise, but for the face shape and for the body type as well. This is why I chose those 5 to talk to you about today. First, we're gonna talk about flat cap, and actually it's pretty old. It started in 14th century approximately. Boys in school were wearing this, and upper-class men in England and Scotland also were wearing it. In 1920s, it was very fashionable piece for young men. How is it normally being styled for women? It's been styled normally in very traditional English, warm, cozy style with very calm, deep colors, dark greens, bordeaux, wine colors, or any type of a brown color. And normally with checked pattern, of course, it can be very small check pattern or larger check pattern. What I mean by that is you can hardly find a girl in bikini wearing this type of cap. It doesn't look juicy, it looks kind of dry and kind of flat a little bit, so definitely we're gonna talk about this piece when we talk about face shapes. In culture, AC/DC vocalist Brian, he always is wearing this type of a flat cap. He's normally wearing just a vest without any shirt. It's a music, it's no rules. Now let's go to mariner's cap, and some people call it captain cap. Many shops call it just regular beret or newsboy cap, but actually newsboy cap is a little bit different. Sometimes they call it also Lenin cap. Yeah, Russian revolutionaries were wearing that type of hat in the beginning of the 20th century. And Greek fisherman cap. Now, in the first quarter of the 19th century, it was workwear cap very often. It was pretty comfortable because it didn't have any brims on the sides, they didn't need to. And normally visor was just covering eyes from the sun for people who were working outside. That was pretty practical. In the 50s, they were making it with black leather also, and we normally associate with 60s mods and rockers. If you remember those 2 subcultures in London. So this type of caps were popular in UK and in US, and there was a movie called The Wild One, and Marlon Brando was wearing this type of a captain cap that also triggered some brands to create this. Also Beatles were wearing this type of hats during their US tour, and Bob Dylan. That was another trigger. Style-wise, you can find so many types of captain caps in internet nowadays. Very often though, this type of hats, they have this kind of like a braid lace here, and then 2 rounded kind of buttons here. It has a little bit military vibe in there too. I also don't see this cap that is worn with something very romantic and too soft style unless you know what you're doing. I'm sure there are some brilliant examples of how it can be worn together. It shows us that similar vibe like with Cowboy hat, that the girl is wearing a dress and she's just wearing a hat of her man. But normally that type of a hat looks amazing with anything quite structured. In summer, if you want to go for lighter fabric, that would also look pretty cool with some casual outfits. For winter, for fall, for spring, they normally make it again with wool or with some canvas too. It can look pretty English, pretty European, or pretty French even. Also rock style, rock and roll style looks amazing. Biker style, bike boots, bike jacket, that will look quite cool. Now we have newsboy cap. Normally this is a cap that is made out of 8 triangular pieces stitched together, and it has this little button on top. Normally this cap is very rounded looking and slightly unconstructed, kind of like the beret but with visor. So it was popular in early 20th century. Both men and boys were wearing this. Workers actually of many professions, not just boys bringing newspapers like it says in the name. For women though, it came back maybe a little bit in the 70s, a little bit in the 80s, a little bit in the 90s, but mostly in 2000s. You remember that? 2000s newsboy caps that have been worn with anything you could imagine. They were wearing with different glam outfits. Glam outfits were worn with something very, very casual, like a tank top and low-rise jeans. So basically there was a mishmash of everything you can imagine. I have something like this, but it is made actually like a captain cap. You can see button here and then the ribbon, and the visor is pretty stiff. However, this is not stiff. You can see that it's like a beret. That would actually look more like a newsboy cap rather than captain cap, because captain cap keeps its shape and you have this tendency on the sides going vertical up and then it's flat on top. Also here at the front, it kind of keeps its shape and it's slightly taller normally than on the sides and on the back. Now we have patrol cap, and sometimes some shops call it military cap, army cap, flat baseball cap, or just cap, whoever knows, whatever. So patrol cap normally was made with thin fabric. It could be cotton, so it would be comfortable to wear underneath a helmet too. Mostly US Army wearing this as part of their outfits. Most of these hats has this khaki color, olive green color, or these kind of different colors, camouflage. Of course that looks pretty cool with army jackets, with army blazers, with different kinds of blazers, because that type of a cap is pretty structured, but it looks quite simple. It doesn't look dressy. It looks very casual just because of its simple shape and its color and its texture, the texture of the fabric. And normally it has very straight shape, straight on the sides, and then it's flat and rounded on top. Very casual, like a baseball cap. It can be worn with different styles. It can look good with sports. For example, newsboy cap I don't quite see with pure sports style. I can see it with casual sports slightly, but not with pure sports style. Army cap I can imagine be worn with sports. However, nowadays women are incorporating it in so many different styles, in business casual and business style. I don't understand. Can you wear a dress and have this very romantic and soft look with this kind of a hat? Unless you put a ribbon on that. Of course no. I also think that it can actually look pretty cool with business casual style. Now let's go to probably the most popular cap. It is baseball cap. Baseball caps started in 1860s. Brooklyn exteriors. So this is the name of a baseball team that was playing in New York. So sometimes that type of a cap was called Brooklyn style cap after this team. Normally these caps had logo of different teams. Also before it was floppier. Right now the shape is a little bit different. It came to female fashion through sports, and then again closer to the 70s, to the 80s especially, women started wearing the baseball hats. Through that sports style it came to an everyday wardrobe. In the 90s women were wearing this a lot, in 2000s, and so on and so on. And right now even women are wearing this with much bigger variety of styles. Business style, business casual. In 2000s you couldn't quite imagine a woman wearing the baseball cap and a classic coat. Nowadays you can see this. Now also they are making this in different fabrics. So if it's a leather baseball cap, it kind of has that more altogether, more chic vibe, more rock vibe, and more business even vibe. That can be worn with more strict outfits and look not as casual as a regular one. I haven't seen it though being worn too much with boho styles, with romantic styles, with glam styles, something extremely feminine. It is still pretty funky piece of clothes, I think, and outfits where you're mixing masculine styles with casual styles. I think this is where it's mostly used. Sports casual, business casual, hip-hop, business, and classic styles. I think it looks great in there. Now let's go to one of our favorite wardrobe pieces. Very feminine, classic, and chic. Beret. Mass production of berets actually began in 19th century in France and Spain. In the beginning it was worn by military and police, believe it or not. Archaeology and art history though indicate that something similar people were wearing many thousands of years ago. This little figure Probably you're familiar with that if you ever studied history of arts. Venus of Willendorf. It's approximately 30,000 years old. And some say it's hair, what you see in her head. And some say it's kind of that woven or straw beret, because it's not the only one that they found. At that time, there were many all over the world that they found. Now, in 1920s, working class people were wearing berets, in France and Spain mostly. In Western fashion, men and women started wearing this as a sport cap first, and then it came to fashion. Also, when we imagine beret, we remember Che Guevara, revolution, a symbol of Argentina. It's interesting because there are loads of stereotypes about berets. This is one stereotype, for example, of that very intellectual film director, artist, painter, hipster, poet, bohemian. Maybe because Rembrandt, the painter, was wearing this, or Richard Wagner was wearing this. Jazz musicians also were wearing berets, like Dizzy Gillespie. Only in the mid-20th century it came to women's wardrobe. In the 50s, Marilyn Monroe was wearing beret. Remember when they were in France? I think gentlemen prefer blondes when they were traveling to Europe. And then in the 60s, loads of women were wearing berets. In London fashion, mods, now later and later and later, 70s also, they started doing a lot of crochet, woven, knitted berets. I have several berets. I have that black one that's made just with simple canvas. I have this one. It's very neutral color. This is woven beret and I like it very much too. In 1930s in Jamaica, they had that kind of a religion that was called Rastafari, I think. They were wearing this very colorful striped beret that you probably are familiar with. Normally they were also having dreadlocks. Nowadays we have this aesthetic of a French girl style on Pinterest. There's a huge amount of pictures of girls being in Paris or just in France wearing these berets. As I understand, there are two types of these berets. There are Spanish and French berets. And Spanish berets, as I know, they're sitting more on top of a head. They are more trapeze looking and they have like a bigger and sharper circle. And French berets, they are smaller and they are more rounded, kind of they go around your head. Even though men also wear berets, today it's still more of a female piece of wardrobe and it looks very beautiful with different types of romantic clothes as well, like dresses, summer dresses, boho style, everything with frills, very soft and feminine. Many women also wear beret with striped t-shirts, with striped shirts, with some scarves, just to give that extra French vibe. They now make it with different fabrics, of course. It has that cute retro vintage style. I rarely see this in sport chic or hip-hop aesthetic. No, I think that is more classic, romantic and natural, and also very vintage too. Oversized berets is quite rare. It gives us a little bit different vibe. Most of the berets though, they are compact and quite small looking. Now we have another one of the most famous hats. It's a beanie. And beanie is probably one of the most universal hats. It's rarely worn in summer though. It's more winter, fall, spring hat. Normally it's made with stretchy material so it would hug the head, and mostly we know it as knitted. It looks like it came from the word bean, which on slang meant head. Also, it is hugging head and looks like a bean. They started wearing beanies actually a long time ago when men needed something brimless but still stiffen the head to keep their hair away of their face when they were doing hard labor. Then later they started making this kind of beanies with visor just to cover the eyes from the sun. That one was for those who was working mostly outside. Style-wise, it's probably the most common hat, but mostly winter, fall and spring. Classic style, even romantic style, boho style, natural style can look great with this type of a hat. Dramatic, business casual, hip-hop, sports, rock, and almost everything that you can imagine. I would not recommend, it is my personal viewpoint, to buy beanies with different kinds of stones, fur pompons on the sides or flowers. I just think it looks very, very dowdy and not stylish. Better choose classic version, whether quite thin and delicate, kind of that cashmere knitted texture, or something more chunky knitted. And about chunkiness, we're gonna talk in my next video about face shapes. Some beanies have pompon on top, some beanies have ears here, which gives them more childish appearance and more cute appearance. Now let's go to a little bit rarer piece, but still has been worn and it's been sold by many shops. It's a turban, a mostly draped turban. Turbans can be very different, but this is approximately the shapes that many shops are selling. It is asking for a specific style. It looks very exotic. It looks very much from the East. It came to Western fashion approximately in the 18th century. In 1920s, it was symbol of Eastern glamour. They were bringing fabrics from countries like India or Turkey to US, to UK. This is how turbans started being more popular. And then many old Hollywood stars, they started wearing them in their movies. And then later we could see Grace Kelly, Elizabeth Taylor, Joan Collins wearing turbans. And a turban is a very interesting piece because it could be worn by royals and by hippies at the same time. Style itself looks very interesting, exotic, and very feminine. I don't know if it would look good with hip-hop or sports style, but definitely women now are incorporating it in classic style, in casual style, in more romantic style. In summer, they're wearing this in linen and cotton. Business, casual, romantic, soft. Dramatic style also, pretty elegant with narrow vertical line, also would look great. Even with stripes, it can look amazing. Now let's go to rarer hats, but you should know what are they called because some people like to do stylizations with those hats. So top hat, this is a hat with very tall crown. It's flat and quite small brim. This is kind of like that hat of magicians, but basically it was worn by men in England. It was a normal dress code. For women, it looks quite interesting. It's more like a stylization for a photo session rather than just everyday look. Rock singers like Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac, she made it kind of her signature style with this top hat, and she was wearing mostly that boho clothes with that top hat, which is interesting. Fleetwood Mac, they became very popular in the 70s, so she was having mostly that boho style and gypsy style. So whenever she was wearing that top hat, it looked like a gypsy girl stole this hat from an English gentleman and now is wearing this in the forest. So this is the picture I drew to myself every time that I see her in this hat. Bridget Bardot, Cara Delevingne, also that kind of a thing. And also it gives a little bit mad appearance, like Mad Hatter, for example. Johnny Depp, remember? Of course, it's not too casual outfit. It's basically more stylization for rock style, boho style, and male Old English outfit with tuxedo jacket, kind of like that magician or illusionist. Another hat, it's called picture hat or picture frame hat. Some people say that it's called like that because it was quite big and it was framing the face as a picture. Some people say that women just were making pictures in these hats and it was kind of big, so would hardly go into that frame for the picture. Opinions vary. Sometimes they also call this hat garden hat. Flowers, fruits, birds. Every design was unrepeatable. Every design was a separate piece of art, and women were wearing these hats. In the 19th century, for example, in the beginning of the 20th century, we remember that Titanic movie, right? This kind of hats looks a little bit like sun hats. In my third video, when we talk about kibbe body types, in his book, I'm actually gonna read you parts of the book about hats. He's saying about these picture hats a little bit. Now, picture hats in the 60s look like that. That is also a picture hat. Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast and Tiffany is wearing this type of hat, but it's much more trapeze shaped. Another hat that we're going to talk about today is balaclava. Not many people like to wear this hat because it looks like you did something wrong. In 19th century, Polish and Prussian soldiers were wearing this. Then sportsmen were wearing this. Sometimes you just keep your eyes open, or sometimes it just looks like very sleek hood. And why it's called balaclava? Because it's city in Ukraine, and that was a Crimean War in 1854. So British soldiers, in order to keep warm, they were wearing this type of knitted hats. Nowadays, they got back in fashion. At the beginning, I didn't even want to search for the outfits with balaclava. Something not for me. It looks quite elegant, actually. It looks kind of like a scarf, or as I said, as a sleek hood. I think if it's made in a very good quality with good knits, that looks pretty nice. I think it looks good with sports clothes, with hip-hop clothes, in winter, autumn, spring mostly, of course. And with coats, I think. With coats, it looks more classic and elegant. And the last but not least, I decided to show you just several winter hats. Winter hats came from Russia, probably. Sometimes they are with ears, sometimes with pompon. They're made with fur, sometimes they are huge and tall, sometimes they are smaller, sometimes they have huge fur or tiny fur, faux fur. This type of hats basically look good on anyone. It's less about face shape, it's more about the style. It can also be made with suede and shearling. That's it, guys. That was long, but thank you so much for staying here with me. I can guarantee it will help you so much to elevate your style, just in general, that education and just knowing the terms of hats and which one was worn with which aesthetic. Let me know, guys, if you have any hats, if you love any hats, if you have problems with finding certain hats hats for your face shape, you can click join down below and subscribe. You will see my videos earlier and I will also reply on your comments. Or you can subscribe on my Patreon. It's basically the same thing. I also upload earlier. See you in 1 week. We're gonna talk about face shapes. Bye.